have evidence that shows Stephan Sterns returning to the complex, and Madeline was visible in that vehicle. We believe she was already dead at that time. Orange County Sheriff John Mina. On February 26, 2024, Madeline Soto, a 13-year-old girl, disappeared from her family's Kissimmee, Florida home. That day, her mother, Jennifer Soto, did not see her daughter that morning. By 4:30 p.m., when Jennifer arrived at Hunters Creek Middle School to pick Madeline up, there was no sign of her daughter. The school reported that Madeline hadn't arrived. At 8 p.m., Jennifer called authorities and reported her daughter as missing. That was the moment a family's world began to fall apart, though at first they couldn't know just how far the cracks ran. The initial search seemed routine, a missing teen, and the subsequent panic. But behind the scenes, one person already knew far too much. Stephan Michael Sterns, the live-in boyfriend of Jennifer Soto. He was the last person to see Madeline alive. And for the next few days, he would be the one telling investigators and the world a story that would ultimately crumble under the weight of its own lies. On the morning of February 26th, Sterns told Jennifer that he had dropped Madeline off near the school. The timing seemed off. Surveillance footage from their Kissimmee apartment complex showed Stephan discarding items into a dumpster at 7:35 a.m., long before Madeline was supposed to arrive at school. The items found in the dumpster, her backpack and school-issued laptop, would later confirm what investigators were beginning to suspect. Madeline had never made it to school. The fact that Madeline's phone had been left at home immediately undermined any theory that she had run away. Jennifer's instinct told her something was wrong, but she trusted Sterns. He had been in their lives for years. He was supposed to be a partner, a protector. And yet, his actions that day didn't reflect someone who cared for the child he was living with. He told Jennifer that he'd accidentally reset his phone while trying to update it, a claim that would later be disproven when investigators uncovered hundreds of disturbing images and videos on his phone. But for Jennifer, it wasn't just the phone reset that should have raised alarms. It was his strange urgency to get the device back, despite their daughter being missing. Sterns' behavior was becoming increasingly erratic. His panic was palpable, but Jennifer couldn't yet see it for what it was: a desperate attempt to cover his tracks. The investigation was launched in full force. Orange County Sheriff's Office issued a public alert for the missing teen, and Jennifer and Stephan gave an exclusive interview pleading for Madeline's safe return. But behind closed doors, things weren't adding up. Stephan Sterns was inconsistent in his recollections. He'd claimed to have dropped Madeline at school, yet no one could confirm she'd been there. Sterns' alibis became more fragile with every question, and his version of events seemed to shift more and more. In the middle of the night, while Madeline was still officially a missing person, Sterns snuck out of the house and drove from Kissimmee to Northport, Florida, and back, a 300-mile round-trip journey that took approximately 6 hours. His parents lived in the area, but his mother later reported she never saw him, leaving the trip completely unexplained. He claimed he had taken Madeline to Hunters Creek Middle School, but surveillance footage contradicted this. In one of his interviews with police, Sterns changed his story multiple times, his inconsistencies growing more glaring with each answer. Investigators had yet to make their move, but the growing psychological tension surrounding Sterns was becoming impossible to ignore. As investigators closed in on Sterns, physical evidence began to emerge. By February 28, 2024, a search of his phone had revealed disturbing material, videos and images of sexual abuse. Despite Sterns attempting to erase them with a factory reset, investigators recovered files from his phone and Google Drive showing abuse that had started when Madeline was just 8 years old. Sterns had kept digital records of the violence, and now they were the key to unlocking the truth. On February 28, 2024, Stephan Sterns was arrested for sexual battery and possession of child sexual abuse materials. The arrest was made after Sterns consented to a search of his phone, a decision that would come to haunt him. The images and videos found on his device spoke volumes, detailing years of abuse and manipulation. But even as authorities took Sterns into custody, the psychological war was far from over. Jennifer Soto's sense of betrayal was still in its infancy, and while her emotions were raw, her suspicions were rising. She had to confront a terrible truth. The man she had trusted with her daughter's safety was not who he had seemed. The anguish she felt was compounded by the realization that her daughter's abuser had been so close to her, living under her roof. As the investigation deepened, Jennifer began to process the overwhelming facts. She had seen photographs of the abuse and heard confessions from Sterns, but nothing prepared her for the true depth of betrayal. Her fight to reconcile the man she had loved with the monster that had hurt her child was a psychological battle she was not prepared to fight. In one heartbreaking interview, Jennifer was confronted with the truth she had been avoiding.
When did you notice that she was missing? Because this was at the beginning of the morning.
She got dropped off in the morning. We did not notice until after school pickup at 4 o'clock when I went to.
She admitted to detectives that it was normal for Sterns to share a bed with Madeline alone, explaining it was so she could get some sleep. The investigation had gathered damning evidence, but the psychological toll on Jennifer was evident. An official report noted that detectives found her emotions to have appeared fictitious, and that she continuously protected Stephan Sterns, even after being shown evidence of the abuse. Madeline's body had still not been found. The case was hanging by a thread, but the truth was becoming undeniable. Madeline had died in her home, at the hands of a man who should have been a protector. But the full depth of Stephan Sterns' depravity was still unfolding. Would the investigation end in justice? Or would the psychological damage wrought on this family be irreversible? Madeline's mother, forever torn between grief, anger, and disbelief, faced the unfathomable question. Could she ever forgive herself? The investigation began with hope. In the early days of Madeline Soto's disappearance, her mother, Jennifer Soto, had done what any parent would. She sought answers, contacted authorities, and even appeared on television pleading for Madeline's safe return. But there were cracks in the narrative, cracks that would soon widen into an undeniable truth. A roommate living in the home provided a potential timeline, telling detectives that around 2:30 a.m. on the night before Madeline disappeared, she heard noises from the room Madeline and Sterns shared. The next morning, the roommate saw Sterns acting odd and washing clothes, something she had never seen him do before. Stephan Sterns, the man who had been in the Soto family's life for years, was at the center of the investigation. His story about a normal school day began to unravel quickly. Surveillance footage from their Kissimmee apartment complex told a different tale. At 7:35 a.m. on February 26, 2024, Sterns was captured on video disposing of items in a dumpster. Inside that dumpster was Madeline's backpack, her school-issued laptop, and a white Croc matching another shoe found in her mother's bedroom. The implication was clear. Madeline had never made it to school. There was something deeply unsettling about the footage. It didn't just suggest Sterns was lying, it suggested he had lied in order to cover up something far worse. For Jennifer Soto, the discovery of images of abuse on Sterns' phone was a psychological blow she wasn't prepared for. The man she had lived with, the man she had trusted in her home, was now exposed as a predator. The tension in her interviews with investigators was palpable. At first, she clung to the belief that Sterns was somehow innocent. But when detectives asked what she thought he was guilty of, she replied, "He's been grooming and abusing my child." As the evidence mounted, denial began to give way to shock, and finally, rage. In one of the interviews, Jennifer was forced to confront the reality of Sterns' abuse against Madeline. The pain was unbearable. Yet even then, in her moments of vulnerability, Jennifer still seemed to struggle with completely acknowledging Sterns' role in her daughter's death. She was emotionally torn, but in the midst of her pain, her strength began to show. Like a mother grappling with the unimaginable, yet unwilling to let go of the pieces of truth that were slowly coming to light. It was during this time that Sterns' actions became even more chilling. As law enforcement continued to uncover more evidence of his twisted relationship with Madeline, Jennifer was left to process the magnitude of his betrayal. His lies weren't just about a missing child. They were about a much darker world that had existed within her own home. The search for Madeline's body intensified over the next few days. On March 1st, 2024, after several more interviews and mounting evidence, law enforcement had enough to confirm their suspicions. Sheriff John Mina publicly stated that investigators were confident Madeline was dead and likely had been killed in her Kissimmee home. The case was now officially a homicide investigation. At 9:42 a.m. that morning, hours before the announcement, surveillance video had captured Sterns' car at a Holiday Inn parking garage in Orlando. A man matching his description was seen carrying what appeared to be a limp female body to the trunk of the vehicle. A crucial tip later came from a witness who saw Sterns' car pulled over with a flat tire on Hickory Tree Road around 1:30 p.m. on the day of the murder, which led investigators to the specific wooded area. Later that day, investigators uncovered the body of Madeline Soto in a wooded area off Hickory Tree Road near St. Cloud, Florida. She was found approximately 30 miles south of where she had gone missing. It was a grim discovery, and a police report noted her body was likely carried over a locked, barbed wire fence. The official cause of death was strangulation, a detail that would soon be confirmed by the medical examiner. The autopsy report noted a concern with the hyoid bone, a telltale sign of strangulation. Even without the full details of the autopsy report, the signs pointed to a violent and intentional act. Madeline's socks were still clean, indicating she had not walked on her own in the area where she was found, a fact that suggested she had been moved after her death. When deputies accessed her phone, they found she had recently expressed a desire to live in the woods, a heartbreaking contrast to the reality of her final resting place. The evidence against Sterns continued to grow more damning. The police investigation revealed that not only had he sexually abused Madeline over a prolonged period, but that he had also taken photographs of his abuse, images that would now serve as the most crucial part of the case against him. Investigators also found evidence that Sterns had researched a potent drug known to cause hypnosis and amnesia, pointing to a calculated, predatory mindset. When detectives spoke to Sterns' ex-girlfriend, she described the relationship she had with him in 2022. She was left with an eerie sense that Sterns' attachment to Madeline was far more than paternal. He had insisted on staying at Jennifer's house because, according to him, Madeline couldn't sleep without him. His predatory behavior extended to others in the home. Investigators found a photo on his phone of Jennifer's female roommate, nude in the bathroom, which he had taken by placing his phone under her door. It was a disturbing portrait of a man with boundary issues, a man whose obsession with a 13-year-old girl was buried behind the guise of a caring stepfather. For Jennifer Soto, the finality of the situation was becoming too much to bear. The shifting timeline and the overwhelming evidence were undeniable. Yet even now, despite everything, Jennifer was still caught between grief, betrayal, and self-doubt. How could she not have known? This question haunted her throughout the investigation. She had trusted Sterns. He had been the man who promised to care for her daughter. And now, as the weight of his actions became clearer, Jennifer was forced to confront the unthinkable. She had allowed a monster into her home. As the investigation moved forward, Jennifer seemed to hold on to fragments of denial, even as she began to piece together the horror of the man she had let into their lives. She questioned herself, wondering how much she had truly known, or if she had simply ignored the signs. This was the emotional complexity of her journey. Caught between a mother's love and the recognition that the man she had loved was capable of unthinkable evil. The case had shifted from a missing person investigation to a tale of manipulation, betrayal, and murder. Stephan Sterns' actions were no longer in question. They were undeniable. Yet the psychological toll on Jennifer Soto was far from over. As she faced the reality of what had happened to her daughter, she was left with a profound question. How could she reconcile the life she had built with the man who had destroyed it? The investigation was far from complete, and the truth had yet to fully unfold. What had motivated Sterns? And what would happen when the final pieces of evidence were brought to light in the courtroom? I can't grasp the selfishness of you, the deplorability of your actions.
It just gets worse every time I rethink about it and the true horror of what this man visited upon her. And I can only hope that he lives a long time in prison.
You're depraved, you're weak, you're a coward. It doesn't heal with time. Tyler Wallace, Madeline Soto's father, addressing Stephan Sterns. On July 21st, 2025, just over a year after Madeline's body was found, the final act in this tragedy unfolded in a courtroom in Osceola County. Stephan Sterns, once a figure that Jennifer Soto had seen as a partner, was now facing the consequences of his actions. He had pleaded no contest to first-degree murder and guilty to 60 other sex crime charges. A plea deal, designed to spare his life, had been struck. A deal that would save Sterns from the death penalty, but also force him to live out his days in prison. But the emotional impact of that deal was far from straightforward. It was a bitter pill for those who had been left in the wreckage of Madeline's death, particularly her father, Tyler Wallace. He stood in the courtroom, not just as a father, but as a man struggling to understand how a man he had never known had destroyed his daughter's life. He was torn between the promise of justice and the reality of what had happened to his child. Sterns' plea deal came as a surprise to many. In the months leading up to the sentencing, the state attorney's office had made it clear they were seeking the death penalty. The charges were grave, and the evidence against Sterns was overwhelming. From digital forensics to the autopsy report, every aspect of the case spoke to one truth. Sterns had been responsible for the abduction, sexual abuse, and ultimately the murder of Madeline Soto. Yet, despite the severity of the crimes, Sterns chose to avoid a death sentence by entering a plea. There was a certain strategic coldness to the decision, a move many found hard to stomach. Justice, it seemed, could be evaded with the right legal maneuver. But the reality was more complex. Madeline's family, through their lawyer, through their presence in the courtroom, had to make a decision about whether the pain of a trial was worth the potential outcome of a death penalty. In the end, it wasn't just the legal system that was wrestling with justice. It was the emotional and psychological toll that weighed on those closest to Madeline. Tyler Wallace, Madeline's father, was not just the victim's voice. He was now the moral compass of this murderous betrayal. There's a reality that often gets lost in legal discussions. The emotional cost of plea deals is never accounted for. The family, the community, the public. They may believe that justice has been done, but for those closest to the victim, it can feel like a double-edged sword. The plea deal robbed Tyler Wallace of one of his final opportunities to see his daughter's killer face the full weight of the law. At the sentencing, Wallace's statement was a raw cry of anguish. "I can't grasp the selfishness of you, the deplorability of your actions. You're depraved, you're weak, you're a coward. It doesn't heal with time." Madeline's grandmother also spoke, saying, "Maddie wasn't just a victim. She was a little girl with a beautiful future, with a unique light, with so much love to give and receive. Today I am here because Maddie can no longer speak, but I can as her grandmother." Another family member added, "This disgusting parasite stole Maddie's youth, her innocence, her life, her joy. I will never bring children into this world because of people like him." In his own words, Sterns expressed sorrow, but it was empty. A hollow apology that did nothing to undo the pain he had caused. "I agree that it is not fair that Madeline is not here anymore," he said, adding that he had prayed to God countless times to trade places with her. The manipulative tone in his statement was unmistakable. Guilt was absent, replaced by a self-centered plea for redemption. The courtroom was heavy with tension. While Sterns might have evaded the death penalty, the emotional toll on the family, particularly Tyler Wallace, was far from over. His daughter was dead, and no legal outcome, no amount of sentencing, could undo the destruction that had been wrought on his life. His words at the hearing reflected not just the rage of a grieving father, but the psychological exhaustion of a man who had already lived through the worst possible nightmare. Tyler's statement to Sterns was direct, not just as a message to the man in front of him, but to the court, to society as a whole. "It doesn't heal with time." Those words rang out as a stark reminder of the emotional violence that came with the loss of a loved one. Justice, in its traditional form, could never account for the psychological ruin that Madeline's murder had inflicted on her family. Tyler Wallace had fought for justice, but in the end, it was not enough to heal his broken heart. Osceola County Circuit Judge Keith Karsten handed down the final sentence. 21 concurrent life sentences, with no possibility of parole. It was, in a sense, the ultimate legal statement. Sterns would die in prison, removed from society forever. Yet for those who had suffered the most, it felt inadequate. The life sentences were merely a legal formality, a consequence of Sterns' choice to avoid the death penalty, but they could never balance the weight of the suffering that had come before. State Attorney Monique Worrell, in her public statement, spoke of the thoroughness with which the case had been reviewed. She expressed that the plea deal had been made in close consultation with Madeline's family, but the decision was still a complicated one. For the family, it had spared them the trauma of a drawn-out trial, but it also meant a lifetime of grief, with no finality, no closure. The moral complexities of this decision, on both the part of the justice system and the Soto family, resonated deeply. The story of Madeline Soto seemed to come to an end. Yet, as with many crime cases, there is no true closure. Madeline's life had been stolen, and the consequences for those left behind were far from finite. The question of justice had been answered, but the psychological and emotional scars were left unresolved. Madeline's family would forever carry the weight of her absence, and the justice system would be forever marked by the complexity of Sterns' sentence. As for Tyler Wallace, he would continue to grieve. Just as his daughter's tragic death continued to reverberate throughout their lives, his words at sentencing would echo in the minds of those who heard them. It doesn't heal with time. And so, as this case finally closed in the legal system, it opened wide the doors to deeper questions. What is justice? And what, if anything, can heal the loss of a child? In her memory, the community raised funds to create a permanent memorial bench in a local park, ensuring her light would not be forgotten.